Thank you everyone for joining us this evening. We have a very exciting event in store tonight. My name's Tom. I'm one of the co-chairs at King's Politics. And before we jump into tonight's event, I wanted to quickly let you know about the last three speaker events we have this term. Emily Thornberry is joining us in person in Keynes Hall tomorrow. And we have Jacob Rees-Mogg joining us virtually on Friday. And then next week, Noam Chomsky will be joining us for a virtual conversation. More information about all of those is on the Facebook. But without further ado, I think it's time to introduce Jon Sopel. There we go. Welcome, Jon. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Hi, how are you?
Most of you are probably fairly familiar with Jon, but I'll give a brief introduction and then we'll jump into it. I'll ask some questions first, and I'll bring in some questions that you sent through while signing up, and then we'll have some time for audience question and answers at the end. If you're joining us on the Zoom call, feel free to turn your camera on. It'd be great to see a few more people on the screen. But if you're on YouTube, feel free to send in a question in the chat function there too. So Jon Sopel is the BBC's North America editor. He has been the main presenter on BBC World News and the BBC's chief political correspondent. He has extensively covered the presidencies of Barack Obama, Donald Trump, and Joe Biden, as well as covering Hurricane Katrina, the South African World Cup, and the Eurozone crisis, among pretty much everything else that's happened over the past few years. He's written a number of books. His most recent is Unprecedented: Politics, Pandemics, and the Race That Trumped All Others. And I should also mention he's currently the odds-on favourite to replace Laura Kuenssberg as the BBC's political editor. But maybe we'll come to that. We might not. We'll see how it goes. So, Jon, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
It's a great pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
I wanted to start off with a bit of a general question, which is, at the end of this year, you'll be leaving this job. You have seen a lot of crazy stuff happen, a lot of amazing stuff happen too. What has been the best day in the job, and what has been the worst day in the job?
Golly. I don't know how you judge best and worst. It's a good question, but I find it hard. I mean, the worst days in the job are when you think there's a story that should get on the air and you don't get on the air, or when on the odd occasions you've taken leave. During the Trump presidency, I mean, crazy things happened on a near daily basis, and you'd suddenly be on holiday and you'd hear that something had happened. You think, oh, damn, I'd love to be there to cover that. So those are the frustrating days if you're a journalist. The best days, and I don't want best to seem like it's a sort of, I'm meaning journalistically best. I mean, you know, the best days were, I suppose, sitting down with Barack Obama in the Roosevelt room of the White House and doing a one-on-one interview with the President of the United States. That seemed a pretty unreal moment. I think the first presidential press conference under Donald Trump, when, you know, I get to ask a couple of questions and I've barely got a syllable out of my mouth, and he goes, "Where are you from?" And I go, "Oh, BBC." He goes, "No, beauty." And you know, and we gotta go back and forwards quite a bit in what I thought was, you know, and it was one of those things that kind of went around the world and got immediate attention and went slightly viral. And you think, oh, I've just, you know, and he said, "I know who you are. I know who you are." And my kids are suddenly texting me saying, "He knows who you are. He knows who," you know, kind of frightening, like, oh my God, are we going to have to leave America now? So that was a pretty kind of fabulous day. And if it doesn't sound perverse and sick to say it, I mean, you know, obviously the big news stories, Trump being woken up in the middle of the night to be told by London that it's just been announced from the White House that Trump has got COVID. January the 6th was an unforgettable day. So there have been lots of amazing days in this job, which have, you know, just been unforgettable, fantastic experience.
Sure. Is there opportunity to switch off in this job? You mentioned about getting woken up in the middle of the night when different things are popping off. It feels like you have to be kind of on guard the whole time, I guess, especially under Trump, when anything can start popping off at any moment.
Yeah, of course, you are on guard, and you know, and you just know that I mean, you know, and it can be, I mean, the downside, that if you want to know what I've hated about this job, I'll tell you. What I've hated about this job is the number of mass shootings that I've been to, mass killings, where you go, there's a police line set up, the forensic teams are doing their work, another 10 people, 15 people, 12 people, however many, have just lost their lives because someone has walked in with an AR-15 assault rifle and created mayhem. And there is no, and you just know. And inevitably you get asked by London, well, surely this is going to lead to a change in the gun laws. And I just think, I wish London would understand, my BBC colleagues, no, it's not going to lead to it. There was Sandy Hook, there were, a number of small kids killed, and that didn't lead to a change in gun laws. If that's not going to lead to it, I don't think anything will. So those are the sort of frustrating bits. But, that call that you get at 5 in the morning, which says such and such has happened, I'm waking you up now because we've booked you on an 8 o'clock flight, so you better get cracking. And, oh, okay, right. That's kind of, and I'm sitting here we're waiting to get hoping for an interview with a congresswoman that we really need to talk to. If you want a job that is 9 to 5 and the phone doesn't go outside of 9 to 5, don't become a journalist.
Is there a presidency which has been, I'm not sure what the right word to use is, enjoyable is the one in my head, but I'm thinking for all the different presidencies you've covered, I guess someone like Obama brings with it a lot of, there's something really special about covering someone like that. And I guess there's a lot of enjoyment potentially from covering something like that. But then with Trump as a journalist, it must be quite rewarding too.
So when I went to interview Obama, that felt really special, but it was the first time I've ever gone into the inner sanctum of the West Wing and interviewed a serving president of the United States of America. And, you realize that the Secret Service kind of around, and just the full flummery. I've done live interviews with the Prime Minister in Downing Street on a number of occasions when I used to do a Sunday politics program, and that sort of felt, that felt good, but it's the sort of the bigness of the presidency and the muscularity of the US presidency that you just think, whoa, this is huge. Barack Obama was interesting. He was thoughtful. Look, he made great speeches. I'm not sure he always quite followed through in actions. And there are some real good question marks. Look, it was in a historic presidency because, of course, it was America's first African-American president. And that is, whatever else he may or may not be remembered for, that will be one of the huge things that happened, that an African-American got elected. It was more or less scandal-free. He had decent approval ratings when he left office. I was really pleased to see the tail end of his presidency. As a journalist, there was no greater gift from God than Donald Trump. Because if you are a journalist, if you're writing for a newspaper, you want to be in the paper. You want to be on page 1 and you want to be above the fold. And if you're on TV, you want to be the lead story. And I was the lead story a huge amount during the 4 years. And, I hadn't intended to write a book when I came out to America. I could barely spell my own name, being flippant now. But I wrote 3 books while I was, I did this American trilogy. I had no intention of writing anything, but it was just so extraordinary that publishers were getting in touch with me and saying, well, could you, look, this is so remarkable. Could you chronicle some of this? And it was fascinating to chronicle. It was a presidency unlike any other in American history. I have now covered half the impeachments in American history. There've only been 4, and 2 of them happened with Donald Trump as the president. So, that sort of stuff, you just think, holy moly, how is this all happening? And so, you can go into the sort of moral side of it. Was he a good man or a bad man? Was he a good president or a bad president? Was he, has he made the world a safer place or a less safe place? And there are interesting arguments to be had around all those things. But if you want, it felt like you were trying to fit your mouth over a fire hydrant with the cap taken off, because there was so much gushing at you 24/7. that there were times. I mean, I think it ends up that you suffer a bit from attention deficit disorder, because what happens is that a remarkable thing happens and you sit there and you sat at your keyboard and say, you know, history is being written tonight after Donald Trump tore up the rule book and did X, Y, or Z. And you say, wow, this is epic. And 3 days later, you can't remember what it was that he'd done on Monday, because by Thursday, something even more batshit crazy has just happened. And so from that point of view, you know, just to be busy, and it was exhausting. I mean, it was exhausting because the noise was relentless. And I was looking at this every 30 seconds to see if Trump had tweeted. You know, you'd wake up at 6 in the morning and you'd realize that at 4 o'clock, presumably Donald Trump had got up to go for a pee and had sent off some furious tweet about this or that. And that is what it was like. And it had some bad sides. As I say, you know, we lost a sense of perspective, and you know, the journalists would go shooting after every shiny object that there was. But, you know, to put it bluntly, if I can, I felt that during the Trump presidency, I was smoking a crack pipe every day, and under Joe Biden, I'm having half a lemonade shandy once a week. And that's the difference.
We got an audience question which came in, which I think is an interesting one. And as it's written, it says, how do you feel the climate of news reporting surrounding the American presidencies has evolved? So I guess longer term, not just over the time that you've covered presidents, have you seen the way in which presidents have been covered change? And I guess another way of asking that question, when you're sat in the press pool, you've got the president at the podium, how has the sort of the mood, the atmosphere amongst the press pool changed across the different presidents that you've covered?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. Look, I think that, let me distinguish British media from American media here slightly. I think that there were sections of the American media that went slightly nuts about Donald Trump. You know, there was a kind of, you know, I mean, the Trump supporters called it Trump derangement syndrome. That you had Fox News on one side, which had always been right of centre and set up because they sensed that there was a gap in the market, that the media, as it was then constituted in the United States, was too liberal and slightly left-leaning, and that where is the right-wing voice? And so Fox News was set up. Since then, Fox has been outflanked to the right by One American News Network and Newsmax. And then there are also obviously all the talk radio stations where you've got, you know, very, very right-wing kind of shock jocks who are pushing, you know, a line. What has happened is that CNN, say, or MSNBC, which is, you know, the two other cable stations, big cable networks, far from saying, well, we'll stay where we are and just, you know, being that slightly liberal voice, I think they monetized anti-Trump sentiment. It was great for advertising. We are more anti-Trump than anyone else. And I just thought, you know, there would be evenings I'd come home and I'd listen to a bit of Sean Hannity on Fox and think, oh God, I can't listen to this. And then I would turn over to Don Lemon on CNN and think, oh, well, I can't listen to this either. And I think that what that's done is a disservice to the American public, that you just live in your echo chamber and you don't hear views that challenge your own. And I think that is fundamentally bad for democracy. Whereas I think in the BBC, we don't do that. And nor, I should say, do Sky News or ITV News. I think that the way we report, you know, Fox, I mean, Sky News would have a different agenda to the BBC. It's a bit more tabloid, and maybe the BBC is a bit more worthy and dull. But broadly speaking, you will have a range of views. I've got CNN on the background because I'm waiting for some court case to break. You're only going to see Democrat congressmen and women or Democrat senators there. And on Fox, you're by and large only going to see Republicans. And the only Republicans you'll see on CNN will be those who are disaffected with the leadership, who are anti-Trump or whatever. And similarly, the Democrats you'll see on Fox News are probably people that are disaffected with Joe Biden. And I just don't think that's a great service. So I think the media has changed a bit. As America has become more polarized, so the media has become a bit more polarized. And I think that you get less good coverage as a result of it.
To take that question into the future a little bit, do you think the British media could be heading in that direction? You have GB News and the attempt over there, which seems to be heading more off the rails as time has gone on. So is this something that you think the UK might become a little bit more like, or is there something about the way media?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question as well. Because I think that look, I haven't seen enough GB News to. But I was talking to somebody who was a regulator and who was saying that actually GB News is on the is on the okay side of the line. It's presenting a different viewpoint to people, but it's still operating within guidelines that are laid out by Ofcom. And so I think that's. I don't think the same thing will happen. I think there will be tendencies, and of course, the British press is pretty polarizing and polarized. But even if you say, look at the Daily Mail or the Sun as being examples of, there are times when they'll give Boris Johnson a right old kicking and say, well, this has gone wrong, or what you've done over, Owen Paterson needs to change, or whatever it happens to be. Whereas I think that in the US example, you don't say anything that is bad if it's your guy you're defending, and I think that's terrible. So I think it's a really, really challenging time to be a journalist, but equally, I would argue there's never been a more important time to be a journalist, because I think there is so much disinformation, misinformation, algorithms that will feed your Facebook timeline full of any old nonsense that may be true and it may not be true. I think that, for democracy to function well, sure, you've got to have confidence in the voting system, but you need to have a well-informed electorate. It's not my job, Tom, to say whether you should vote for Boris Johnson or Keir Starmer. It's not my job to say whether you should vote for Brexit or against Brexit, or for Donald Trump or Joe Biden. But what I would really love is to think that you were well informed when you went into the polling station. That's our job, to give people factual information that they can make judgments on, not tell people what to think. And I think in the US example at the moment, you are just telling people, right, I know this is what you think already. I'm just going to reinforce, it's like, I believe that news is there to inform. And I think that too much news in America is there to affirm what you already think.
We had another interesting audience question come through along these kind of lines, and it was, how did the BBC's rules about impartiality affect your ability to report or perhaps to provide analysis of the Trump presidency?
So there are some, and there are many in the BBC who talk about impartiality as this kind of weight that we have attached like a ball and chain to our ankle, which says, oh, well, we've got to go on the one hand and on the other, and we've got to be, some people say this, some people say that. Only time will tell. Jon Sopel, BBC News, Westminster, Washington, wherever. I think that's fundamental bullshit. I think that I believe in this idea of aggressive impartiality. I'm not for Trump or against Trump, but I will hold the president to account. Our job as journalists is to, if you looked at some of the blogs I wrote over Afghanistan, I would say they were, and the Biden pullout, Biden pulling the troops out, I would say they were pretty aggressively impartial. They were really tough on Joe Biden. He told American people, what his hallmark would be competence and empathy. And arguably, there was precious little empathy and precious little competence in the American pullout. I'm not afraid to say that on air. I think that I am able to operate impartially and still make judgments that affirm. Why I think impartiality is liberating is that you go back to your previous question. If you're Fox News, you can't say, oh my God, what a mess. Donald Trump didn't win the election. He lost the election. All the judges said that he lost the election. Ours is a country of laws. How can he possibly claim it? You wouldn't say that on Fox News. And equally, I worry that on CNN at the moment, you wouldn't say anything that would really detract against. I think impartiality is an opportunity for us. We're not owned by anybody. We can be tough, but we're going to be fair. And I think that's there is no point So just in terms of the Trump presidency, it's a really interesting question. On day one, Donald Trump asserted that the crowd for my inauguration was the biggest in American history. And all you needed to do was to compare two photographs of when the inauguration was going on. One, Barack Obama's first inauguration in 2009, and two, and they were taken from the Washington Monument, same photo, same framing, and the photo of 2017 at Donald Trump's first inauguration. Barack Obama had a way bigger crowd. Now, Trump obsessed about the fact that his crowd was the biggest. And it was just, I kind of thought there was a really good argument that Trump could have made. Is that, well, it's fine for all these well-off liberals to come to Washington and take the day off work to come for inauguration. The people that supported me are hard-working, blue-collar workers, and they can't afford to do that, so they were at work. But he couldn't do that. He wanted to say sides. Well, when I go on air, I'm not going to say, on the one hand, Donald Trump says this, and on the other hand, Barack Obama says that. It was clear to me, absolutely crystal clear to me, that it wasn't true what Donald Trump was saying. I had to say it. And I discussed it with BBC bosses, saying, are we on day one of his presidency going to say this is not true? And the answer was, yeah, we're going to say that because it's not true. So if somebody says, I just think that it is an absolute failure of reporting to say some people say 2 + 2 is 4, but other people say 2 + 2 is 6, only time will tell. Well, no, 2 + 2 is 4.
Sure. To change tack a little bit, we've now got President Biden in office, obviously vice president under Barack Obama. How much of Barack Obama do you see in Joe Biden?
Some. I think that they did have a good working relationship, but I think some people overdo the closeness that there was. I think in some areas, Biden has been more daring than Obama, who was rather cautious. So Obama was persuaded of the need to surge the number of troops in Afghanistan and Iraq. Biden has pulled the troops out. So some would say impetuously. Some would say that he tied himself to a timeline. And I think that Biden is doing a lot. Look, there are a lot of people around who had served in the Obama administration who are now with Joe Biden. But I think that you can over-exaggerate the similarities. And I think that, look how much more ambitious Biden has been on spending. And, so what Obama introduced after the 2008 financial crash when he took over in 2009 was much more modest in compared to what Joe Biden is attempting to do. I think Joe Biden is trying to lower the temperature of American politics. I'm not sure he's succeeding in that yet. His infrastructure bill is a big deal, but it remains unclear to me what the electoral dividend will be, if any, for him, because I think, heading towards the midterms next November, it could be pretty brutal for the Democrats.
To ask a similar question from a different angle, do you think you can also over-exaggerate the difference between Obama or Biden and someone like Trump? Do you see any of Trump in Obama or Biden?
I don't see much Trump in Obama, but I do see bits of Trump in Biden. I mean, bring the troops home. That was a Trumpian policy. That was what Trump wanted to do. Stop the endless wars was Trump. And if you look at, let's deal with something closer to home about a trade deal with the UK that Britain obviously needs and would like post-Brexit. There is absolutely zero interest from the American side in negotiating a free trade agreement with the British at the moment, because Biden's mantra is American jobs for American workers. That is the same economic nationalism that Donald Trump had. So, it would be lousy politics for Biden to come in and just ignore the fact that Trump was very popular on a lot of issues that he had. And so there are areas, so look, on climate change, yeah, Biden is completely different to Donald Trump, no doubt about it. And the engagement of the Americans in COP26 was, I mean, if Trump had won a second term, would America have actually been at COP26? Good question, interesting question. Would they have made any big commitments? Interesting question. So there are areas of great dissimilarity, but don't ignore there are bits of foreign policy that Biden is pursuing, tough line on China, that is straight from what happened when Donald Trump was president. So there are areas of continuity, even though in terms of personality, the characters couldn't be more different.
Yeah, sure. So when Trump was elected, I remember coming down in the morning. I wasn't an election all-nighter back then. I came down in the morning and saw he'd been elected, and it felt like a real kind of moment. This was a once-in-a-generation sort of thing. Yeah. But now, a few years later, it feels like the something needs to change. Kind of attitudes that led to Trump still exists in a lot of places. Do you think a Trump-like figure could be where America goes? Not necessarily after Biden, maybe after Biden, but in the foreseeable future? Or is it, do you think, a once-in-a-generation thing that it was sort of labeled as at the time?
Yeah, you see, you used the phrase Trump-like figure. Do I think there could be a Trump-like figure? Absolutely. I mean, so the Republican candidate who runs in 2024 is not going to be saying, oh my God, Donald Trump, what an aberration. You're not going to get elected. Trump still has a huge hold on a sizable chunk of American public opinion. So it's absolutely clear to me that it is going to be a Trump-like figure that will run in 2024 for the Republicans. It might even be Trump himself who runs in 2024 to see if he can get his second term. I think that the problem that the Republican Party will have is that if it's seen to be Donald Trump, I'm not sure after January the 6th, it will crystallize the independents, moderate Republicans, and if the Democrats have got a halfway sane candidate, it will be, I think it'd be very hard for Donald Trump to win again, as the polls currently stand, but things change quickly. Donald Trump needed to reach out beyond his base, and he was determined not to. He just kept, it was a focus on his base. But Trump-like is not Trump. You could see the sort of people like Ron DeSantis, the governor in Florida, or a few other people who Mike Pompeo, who was Secretary of State for Trump, saying, look, we made mistakes, but the message of, America first and all that stays. And you just do a slightly more sanitized version of what Donald Trump went, that would still be a very powerful message.
I'm going to ask a couple more questions and then turn to audience.
I'll tell you what, you carry on asking a question. I'm just going to get a glass of water. So
go for it.
Yeah.
Okay. So my question is, what do you think the prospects are for US-China relations? COP26, you had Biden, John Kerry, Barack Obama all making comments towards China and using their absence as a bit of a political tool. It's the big geopolitical question. Do you think there is opportunity for the two to move to more of a cooperative relationship over the next few years? Or is it something which is, as many people argue, is just destined to end in some form of conflict, whether military or economic or otherwise?
Well, yeah, there's a huge difference between the two, if I might say so, between a military conflict and an economic conflict. I mean, the economic conflict, I think that President Xi and Biden know each other and know each other well. Their relationship goes back a long way. I think it was encouraging that there was, conversations went on. There was a virtual summit that took place on Monday night, which seemed to make good progress. I mean, no agreements, but it's something accidental happening that is what would be terrible. Look, there is mistrust over China's human rights record, what's going to happen in Taiwan. Taiwan, I think, is the really interesting one, whether, you know, an increasingly nationalist China decides to try and, you know, take over in Taiwan. I think that could be a real flashpoint. You've got the origins of COVID, you've got intellectual property theft. You know, there is a whole long list of things where America and China do not see eye to eye. But there was the joint statement issued during COP, you know, agree where we can, disagree respectfully, and try to minimize confrontation seems to be the way forward. But you have got an increasingly assertive China that is spending a huge amount on defense. This hypersonic missile they tested, I think, has frightened the life out of the Americans. And, you know, it's sort of almost a Sputnik moment where, you know, in the space race of the 1950s, Russians put a satellite up before America, and the Americans thought, how is this possible that the Soviet Union, as it was then, has outgunned us? So I think there are areas for real concern. But I think that, you know, and arguably under Obama, too much of a blind eye was turned to what China was doing and asserting itself, and, you know, letting China take over a lot of multilateral world bodies. So I kind of think that this is one to watch. But I think that, you know, economic confrontation between the two sides, or competition as they would call it, is to be expected. Military entanglement would be, you know, horrifying.
Okay, great, thank you. Let's turn to some audience questions. So the first picks up on a question I asked just before, and it is, do you think Trump will run again in 2024? And if he did, or I guess before that, do you think he would win the Republican nomination?
So I'll take the second part of the question first and then go to the first part. Will he win the Republican nomination? I don't believe there is anybody who could stop him. I don't think there is a candidate out there who stands a chance in a head-to-head contest. Trump still galvanizes so many people, and while there are a lot of disaffected Republicans, I don't believe they've got either the organization or the money or the capability to. I mean, Chris Christie would be one to watch, the former governor of New Jersey. But I'm not sure that Chris Christie builds a mass movement against Donald Trump. So I think if Trump goes for the nomination, he gets it. Will he go for it? I think he'll be watching and reading the polls and listening to the evidence very closely, because, you know, his ego couldn't stand losing last time, and that's why he hasn't been able to accept that he did lose. And I don't think he would want to do it again unless he was pretty certain that he was going to be swept to power with people throwing rose petals in front of him as he walked into 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue.
We've got another question, which is essentially the same one on the other side. Do you think Biden has the energy to run another term, or do you think it will be a different Democrat? And if you think it would be a different Democrat, who do you think is in the running? Yeah,
so look, I think that at the moment, these things are very hard to tell. If you go back to 2005, so 3 years before the 2008 presidential election, hardly anyone had heard of Barack Obama. You know, he was this freshman senator, junior senator for Illinois. And by 2008, he knocks Hillary Clinton out of the race and becomes the Democratic candidate in 2008. So there's still a lot you don't know. And 3 years out from a presidential election is a long, long time. That said, let me go through this block by block. Biden at this stage cannot say, I'm not running again in 24, because if he does so, he's a lame duck. No one is going to, listen to a word he says, and it's going to be a beauty parade of all the ambitious wannabes trying to become the next candidate. So I think that Biden has to say that he is going to run. Can I foresee him running? No. I mean, he would be 82, he would be 83 when he comes into office. I think he shows his age, and I don't subscribe to the idea that he's senile or he's got dementia, which some people say. I mean, not that I'm a medical person, so I'm not in any position to qualify, but I've watched Biden at enough news conferences. He's long-winded. He always was long-winded. You know, why use one word when 100 will do? And so I think that he is what he is and always was. But I do think that, you know, the aging process has been, you know, it's taken its toll on him. Whereas Donald Trump looks like a very vigorous 75-year-old, Joe Biden looks like quite an old 79-year-old. So I don't see that he runs. Then it is, will it be Kamala Harris? I doubt at the moment, given what I'm hearing in Washington, and Washington is a very gossipy city. What I'm hearing at the moment is that she's not overly impressing in the White House, and her poll ratings are pretty awful. And so I think that I'm sure the Republicans would love to be fighting Kamala Harris in 24. My money is watch Pete Buttigieg, the transportation secretary, who ran again, you know, who impressed in the Democratic nomination for 2020, who is, and because he's the transportation secretary, he's also in charge of so much of the infrastructure money that has just been passed. So he's going to be Mr. Bountiful, handing out $1 billion here and $1 billion there. And so I think that he would be one to watch on the Democrat side.
Great. I think he's one of my favourites. I thought it was super impressive what he did in the previous run. We have another question on Trump's foreign policy. So do you think Trump really represented a big change in foreign policy or just an acceleration of established trends? And if anyone else has a question, please feel free to stick it in the chat or to raise a hand on the Zoom and we'll go to it live.
I think that there were bits of it that were continuity. So, for example, Barack Obama as well wanted NATO members to put in more money into the coffers so that less of the burden fell on the United States for the collective security umbrella. That was absolutely straight out what Obama had been calling for. So in that sense, I think that Donald Trump represented a degree of continuity. I think that he did some stuff that you just had to marvel at the daring of it. I don't believe any other president would have dared hold face-to-face meetings with Kim Jong-un. Now, the first summit in Singapore, you know, everyone was terrified there was going to be a nuclear confrontation between North Korea and the West. And after that summit that everyone said he shouldn't go ahead with, those fears dissipated. Now, ultimately, did it achieve anything? No, because I think that North Korea carried on developing its nuclear program while all the time, you know, pandering to Donald Trump and writing lovely letters about what a great leader he was. I think that North Korea stole a march on America and pulled the wool over Donald Trump's eyes because he was so flattered by Kim Jong-un and the lovely letters he wrote. He wasn't really kind of, you know, has the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula grown a step closer? Absolutely not. But then you get other things of the Trump presidency in terms of his foreign policy, the Abraham Accords, which has seen the UAE signing a peace treaty or a kind of, you know, re-establishing diplomatic relations with Israel, or establishing diplomatic relations, not re-establishing, establishing diplomatic relations with Israel. That was extraordinary. That was a big deal. That was, you know, that was a sort of big move that, and it was hard, and Bahrain also signed that. It's hard to believe that that could have possibly happened without Saudi Arabia's say so. So there you're talking about a sizable chunk of the Middle East working with Israel. And that is a big, big change. And I thought that, you know, I'm surprised that Trump didn't make more of that in the presidential election, because there's a very strong, I mean, there's a kind of weird evangelical Christian love of Israel, which I won't get into now, but the reasons for it, that, you know, that it would, I'm surprised that Trump didn't maximize that message more in the presidential campaign.
Naman, you've got your hand up. Over to you.
Hi, so I have a question about China, actually. I'm curious to what extent do you think the US concerns about China are actually grounded in human rights and the like, versus just desire to maintain hegemony? I mean, it seems almost inconceivable to think that most Americans care about Taiwan or even know where Taiwan is.
Yeah, but Taiwan is seen as an America kind of style model, an American style way of governing, and therefore I think there is a strong sense that there is a responsibility towards Taiwan. I mean, I think they're probably less preoccupied by, say, what's happening in Hong Kong, but I think it's all of a piece that, you know, which side is America on? Is it on the side of human rights? And it is hegemony. Of course it's hegemony, because you don't want to see an over assertive China, and you don't want to see America at a competitive disadvantage to China. But I think that they all play a part in American unease, and it's just the accumulation. Just keep pouring things in. Taiwan, what's happening to the Uyghurs, what's happening in Hong Kong, and a feeling that there is a nationalistic China and a nationalistic president who is very powerful and is pushing things to breaking point. And I think America feels it needs to assert itself on all those fronts at the moment.
Thanks for the question, Naman. Joseph, you've got your hand up. Over to you.
Hi, John. Thank you very much for coming to speak to us today. Really appreciate it. My question is about something which is just broken in the New York Times. Jacob Chansley, that guy, the QAnon shaman, you know, the guy with the Viking horns and the bearskin. He's just been sentenced. 3.5 years. Yeah, 3.5 years. And so my question is, what's your understanding at the minute? What's the sort of general chat in Washington about the higher level people who are alleged to have been involved in the January 6th attacks? I'm thinking of the Steve Bannons and the Kayleigh McEnany's and even that guy from the Pillow Company. Are they expected to get similar sort of sentences if they were found guilty?
Well, the trouble is, what would they be found guilty of? I mean, there's no criminal offence of being up to no good. Mm-hmm. And you'd have to define it in terms of law. They were not seen breaking into Congress. But the role of Steve Bannon particularly is fascinating. Because he was at this hotel just around the corner from the White House days before, and he went on his radio show the day before on January the 5th to more or less lay out what would happen. All hell is going to break loose. Buckle up. It's going to be, you know, you patriots are going to, you know, bring everyone's attention to this. Da 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 da. And you know, had plotting gone on, was this, you know, had the Trump White House been talking to Steve Bannon? Was Steve Bannon in touch with the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers and all these other kind of groups that were played such a decisive role in January the 6th? And I think that is why you're seeing such strenuous pushback from Trump asserting executive privilege retrospectively, saying that none of these people should have to talk to the committee. And so you've got Steve Bannon now facing contempt of Congress charges because he refused to appear. So whilst the shaman who is there with his kind of horns and tattoos and, you know, looking kind of extraordinary, getting 3.5 years, he had broken into the Senate. He had broken into the House, you know, he'd broken into Congress. He had trespassed. And therefore, it was a criminal offence. You could see if you've beaten up a policeman, you have committed a violent act against the policeman. You can see what the criminal act is. I think in American law, the idea of conspiracy to start a riot would be very, very difficult to prosecute. So I suspect that, but Trump obviously wants to shirk as much responsibility as is possible, and that is why they're going out with such vengeance after people like Liz Cheney, you know, Republican congresswoman from Wyoming, and the Republican Party disowning her because she said, you know what, it was unconstitutional what happened. It should never have been allowed to happen, and Donald Trump stirred this whole thing up. So, you know, January the 6th is going to be argued about between now and next polling day and well beyond.
I guess the second part of that question I was going to ask is, those people then, sort of the shaman, those sorts of people, the sort of strong, ardent supporters of Trump, who believe that they have been told by Trump and by people like Bannon to be there on the 6th of January, do you think that their opinion now of Trump might change because they might feel as though they've been left high and dry?
Well, they've been marched up to the top of the hill and then been abandoned. It's possible, but my guess is that they still, Donald Trump still has this extraordinary grip on his people. There are probably 30% of Americans who, and that's a huge number. I mean, that's just, think about how many people we're talking there, believe that the election was stolen. Even though I say to you, there is no evidence of anything other than Joe Biden winning that election fairly and squarely. It's all been litigated. The 50 secretaries of state from around the United States signed the results of the election as being fair. There were Republican governors, there were Democrat governors, they all signed the results as fair. There were 62, 63 court cases. Trump lost all but one of them, trying to litigate the results and trying to overturn things. Didn't work. No evidence was, there were assertions aplenty and evidence none. And so I kind of think, and the Attorney General said it was a fair election, the head of election security said it was a fair election, the Vice President Mike Pence certified it, so in Donald Trump's head, the election was stolen. But I don't think that anyone who was in a position of responsibility, who had legal responsibility for the election, would say anything different. But you've still got 30% of Americans who want to believe that the election was stolen. And so I kind of think that I do not see the distancing of people from Donald Trump. I still think that Donald Trump maintains a very strong grip on his base.
Thanks for the questions, Joseph. Naman, I think you've got another question. Do you want to jump on?
Yes, you mentioned mass shootings earlier and the regularity of coverage of them. And I'm thinking, just across the border, you have the war on drugs in Mexico, which is much greater in scale, intensity, it has all the elements of conflicts around the world, beheadings, assassinations. Yet they have very little coverage, especially within the US. I live on the border. And with the exception of El Chapo, perhaps escaping from prison, it seems to be quite a minor news item. And I'm wondering, why do you think there's this major focus on mass shootings, but largely disregard in the media of something like the war on drugs in Mexico?
Right. So whereabouts are you from on the border?
I live in San Diego.
Right. Okay. Lovely. Beautiful place. Yeah. Look. The simple answer is that Mexico isn't the United States of America. Mexico isn't the most powerful country in the world. America and its Second Amendment is something that just fascinates people. I mean, we've got the Kyle Rittenhouse trial going on at the moment, where a 17-year-old kid washes up in Kenosha with an AR-15 assault rifle, full metal jacket bullets, and is probably, very possibly, going to get off with self-defense as his defense for killing two people and seriously wounding another. So I think that America comes in for more scrutiny because it is not only is it the preeminent superpower still, but perhaps more importantly, the origins of the United States of America, the shining city on the hill, the kind of the state that started with a blank sheet of paper, that would be the beacon of democracy and goodness around the world. And yet you see the craziness. I think it's something like 35,000 people die a year in America at the hands of a gun. That's a colossal number. And so when you get, random mass shootings at a country music festival in Las Vegas, or at a church in Charleston, or at, or at a school in Parkland, Florida, they do shock, and rightly so. Because if you look at the comparative data for other liberal Western democracies, in advanced liberal, look at any other G7 country, or more or less any G20 country, nowhere have the homicide rates. And I suppose America will get that attention in a way that Mexico, where there's a certain degree of shrug of the shoulders. And realistically, it only kind of matters when it comes across, when that violence comes across the border. It's a good question. It's the same reason that, you know, a train crash in America, a train crash in the UK that kills 50 people would be the lead story for weeks on end on the BBC. Whereas if a train crash in Pakistan or India or China would not command the same degree of attention.
Great, thanks for the question, Naman. We have one more, and I think this will be a good question to finish on, so we'll leave it with this. It's a big one, but it is, I'm sure there are many, but could you tell us a cool story we probably haven't heard from your time inside the White House, I think?
God. Yeah, golly. I mean, there are so many stories from the Trump era. I mean, you know, there was the day that John McCain died. The Chief of Staff, General John Kelly, ordered the flag to fly at half-mast. Trump seized the flag flying at half-mast, and Trump hated John McCain and ordered it back up to full-mast. And then that produced an enormous backlash. So the flag was lowered again to half-mast. And, you know, that sort of stuff was happening on a daily basis. My favorite, there was a breakfast show on MSNBC called Morning Joe. And they were doing this thing about, someone had got a leak of the Trump calendar, his schedule for the previous 60 days. And what it was clear was there was nothing that happened before 11 or 11:30, and nothing that happened after 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So the presenters were going on and saying, he is the laziest president ever. He doesn't do any work. He is lazy. He is idle. Da 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 da. Within 30 seconds, Trump tweets, "I am the most hardworking president ever." You hadn't thought that through, Donald, had you? You were clearly watching television at the time. And it was just so perfect. It was just one of those things where you just laugh because he kind of rather proved the point.
Wow. Yeah, thank you so much, John. It's been really interesting to hear all your insight this evening from so many years of being right at the heart of some of the big things that are happening in the world at the moment. So thank you so much for giving up your time from your incredibly busy schedule to join us. And thank you everyone for coming tonight, and also for sending in questions beforehand and asking questions tonight. Have a great rest of the week.
Cheers. Bye-bye. See you.
Cheers.